Hello, my name is Jolene Teresa. I'm the founder of Studio X Presents, and we are here today to talk about decorating a space. Not to be confused with building a set, although very similar. Building a set is typically when you have a physical structure that you're bringing in. Maybe you've pre-built it, or maybe it needs to be built at the venue. Whereas decorating is just that. We're putting up different elements maybe on the wall to create an aesthetic without actually physically creating objects that need to be moved in and out. Now, you may be thinking that sounds like the exact same thing, and that's fine, but we're gonna be talking mostly about decorating, how to make a space feel like what we're going for instead of physically bringing in objects to make it look like or be like that thing. So in hindsight, sets is more of a look and decorating is more of a vibe or a feel. Now, we at Studio X often do both, so we're gonna be talking about similar things with decorating as we did with set building. We're gonna be talking design, measurement, cost, planning, and lighting. Starting with design. Now, we've talked a lot about this where you do wanna be realistic with your design. Obviously create the ideal feeling and vibe that you're going for, but then create a realistic version of it, not just for cost, but for your own sanity. Understand the time parameters you have for setting this up and plan ahead. So when you're gonna be doing something, if you know that it's gonna take a long time, figure out a way where it will take less time. For example, we recently did a show that involved vines, a lot of vines. Now, this was going to take hours that we did not have to set up. So beforehand, I laid out all of the vines, tied them together, and then rolled them up in tissue paper so that they wouldn't lock into one another. So when we had to decorate this space, the person who was doing this task simply had to hold the end and release. So the roll came out and it wasn't tangled because there was tissue paper in between. So instead of taking hours, this took about 20 minutes. Now keep in mind your time, but also keep in mind measurements. Make sure that you have all these measurements ahead of time and make things a little bit longer or wider than they need to be, or maybe a little smaller, depending on what it is you're doing, and adjust from there. So if you're draping fabric, maybe it's a little too long because you can always pin it up. If you're sliding something in like seating or some type of box for a display, then make it a little bit smaller and be okay with that. Just like with sets, be creative. Be creative with designing things. Think overall. We're going for feeling here. It doesn't have to look exact, but you want that vibe, that feeling. So for Let Them Eat Cake, although we did build a physical set cake, it wasn't used for the whole show, it was just used for a small portion. And decorating wise, to mimic that, we just draped fabric to make the catwalk look like a cake, which gave you this feel that you were in this Victorian party and there was a cake and these dresses, but there was no actual set left, it was just this decorating. So when you're designing sets, you're really thinking of movable objects to put into the space. But when you're decorating, you want to think the whole space. For Grimm Fairy Tales, we did have a lot of wood-like features, like you were in a forest or in the woods. So we brought in Christmas trees that we decorated the front area with and made it look a little bit like a forest. And to pull that in towards the stage, we put actual physical tree branches on the aisle walking between to come down towards the stage where you find your seating, which pulled the eye towards this forest-like view. Now, this was just decorating and it did take a bit of time, but again, we pre-clumped the branches together so that it was pretty easy. You would just zip tie clumps up and you were good to go. Now, did it look like an actual forest? No, but it definitely gave you the feeling that you were walking into a forest, which coincidentally also made people feel like they were walking into our story. So it was more of the feeling than the actual physical, literal set. Take measurements, have measurements for everything. you are going to want to measure twice, cut once. You will hear me say this a lot. Measure twice, cut once, and don't use your physical body if you need exact measurements. So as you're measuring spaces, make sure that you keep in mind that if someone gave you these measurements, it might not be exact. So again, with fabric, if you want to make it look draped, make it a little longer than you expect it will need to be because you can always pin it up. When we used the tree branches to create a forest, we definitely brought too many, and we brought some that were way too big, knowing that we could just snap the end off and make them smaller. Even if you get measurements of a venue from the venue, say they're on a floor plan or they give you blueprints, just know that these may not be exact, and they may also not be how you're perceiving them. You may be getting the exterior measurements when you really need the interior measurements. So keep that in mind, but also know that you need to be adaptable when you're producing an event because things will go awry, and measurements tends to be one of those where things really just go wrong quickly. Also keep in mind, your venue may have movable objects that will affect the measurement. So if there's movable seating, maybe they have a stage that's on casters, whatever it is that could move, acknowledge that that measurement of distance between objects may change. If your venue has floor seating and tables that are moved around for different events, you can move those around, but also know that the measurements may be slightly off and you may need to move those around. Or you may have an event where you have everything designed and planned and you get to the venue and they say, no, absolutely not, that's not ADA compliant. Keep everything in mind. You're gonna need to know the measurements. What is the smallest amount of space that you can put this item in? What is the smallest amount of space for tables and chairs? If you have some type of protruding artwork, you don't want it impeding on someone's view or space. You want to make sure how you're decorating enhances the space and it doesn't obscure anything for people. So take measurements and be as exact as possible. Now, we definitely have a few pieces of props, equipment, sets that we use as measurement tools for some of the venues that we work with. We know that this can only be set at this height, which means this is the highest any of our sets can be. But we also know this is the width of this. So if we're decorating, we know that this is the widest that thing can be. We often use our aerial rig as a measurement tool, specifically because it is an exact height. But again, you could always use a string or some type of measuring tape, which is highly inexpensive. Just get some measuring tape. Keep your cost in mind. Now, cost can get out of hand so quickly. Make sure you have a budget and that you stick within that budget. We have so many random pieces on hand just in case to cut costs, especially for decorating. We have random fabric in varying thicknesses, color, width, length, whatever it is. We also have a ton of different tchotchkes that we use for decorating VIP tables or decorating stage areas or our entrances. We like to use all of these different things and repurpose them. A really great thing to reuse and repurpose is holiday decorations. So for Grimm Fairy Tales, when we created our forest, we used Christmas trees. We used people's at-home Christmas trees as decoration because it was something that was easy and inexpensive to use. It also looked really good. As we talked about in building sets, yes, you definitely want to get things that are the exact color, size, shape, whatever weight that you need. But if that's really not in your budget, make sure to just have things on hand. You can be creative and build it, or you can just make sure that you have additional things on hand. So if you need to make something just a little longer or a little wider, but you know it's decoration and it's going to be further away from your guests, you can use things like paper, fabric, cardboard, anything to make it seem like it's the thing, right? We're looking for feeling, not necessarily detailed visual. Things that we at Studio X have on hand at all times for both sets and decorating: fabric, random dollar store tchotchkes, vases, cups, glasses, bowls, plates. We have a lot of random wood from various things. Maybe it's a pallet board, old furniture. We have cardboard, hardboard, any materials that are just random. I like to call it the trash section. Just give me your trash. If it's something where you don't want to throw it away because you don't know if it could be used again, but like you don't need it, give it to us. You buy a bookshelf and it has that hardboard backing and you don't want to throw it away, but you're never going to use it, give it to us. We'll find a use for it, and it will probably be for some type of set or decorating. Let's talk planning and backup plans. So you obviously want a space plan. You want to know where everything's going to go and if it's going to fit, and this kind of rolls into measurements. We've talked before about using graph paper so that you can get exact measurements, but when it comes to decorating, you may not need exact measurements. You might not need to go that far. Once you have your plan, you're going to want a backup plan. We like to have a couple backup plans. So when you're planning, plan everything and physically lay it out. Make sure that things are easy to move, easy to unwrap, easy to hang up, easy to display. If they're not, find a way to do that. We talked about the vines earlier and how they were getting stuck. But to make it easy for my team, I wrapped them in very cheap tissue paper so that they rolled completely out. Yes, they had to clean up the tissue paper, but that didn't take as much time as it would have to pull these single leaves apart because the vines got stuck. We also pre-decorated all of the vines. So all of the flowers that we put on the vines were twist tied on there ahead of time or tied with string. Any way that we could make sure that this was stable and easy to just roll out for time. Now, we did leave a little extra time as a backup plan in case they needed to unravel, and we did have extra supplies on hand in case it wasn't long enough, wasn't wide enough, or just wasn't enough. We typically have extra supplies on hand at the events just in case, but we usually don't even need them. So we have a plan and then we have our backup plan. Now, if that didn't work, these vines for the event we were doing were going on swings. So we could have just not put the vines and no one would have known any different. It just would have felt better if they were there. It would have given you this whole feel of being inside of a field or a meadow, and without them, it wouldn't have given that. Now, for reference, we did borrow the idea of the swings and the vines from Chateau Woe in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you haven't checked them out, definitely check them out. They are a phenomenal dance studio and have a ton of different things going on, including photo and video events. Now, part of having a plan and a backup plan is having people who know the plan. So make sure you've gone through this with your team ahead of time, whether that's sending them videos or having them physically come to a space where you can work everything out and make sure that it's going to go as planned day of. And remember that measurements might not be exact, so make sure your team understands. If it doesn't fit, fine, use this one. Or if it doesn't fit, fine, we don't need it, it's not important. Now, if you've been on this channel before, you have heard us talk about lighting. We are big on lighting. I specifically am obsessed with lighting. And lighting is a key element to sets, shows, events, and decorating. If you're looking to change the color of something, lighting can be a really helpful tool. We have a lot of different white fabrics on hand because we know that if we want to change the color of that fabric just a little bit, we can do so with lighting. We can also change the way things are perceived. Maybe we have a fairly sheer fabric and there's people behind it, so you see shadows. Or maybe there's objects behind it, so you see shadows. This is a really cool way to create silhouette without having to actually design a set of silhouette. Lighting can also change the way different physical pieces feel. So with drastic lighting, you can make it feel really moody and dark. Maybe with some highlighting, you can make it seem really bright and fresh. Use lighting, use your lighting tech to figure out how to give this feel. Maybe you want a dark vibe, and so you're doing lots of uplighting where everything looks tall and shadowed. Or maybe you want this fresh, upbeat vibe where there's a lot of pinks and yellows and it's directly on the decor or directly at certain elements to make it seem very fresh and upbeat. Again, with decorating, remember we're going for feel. So you can change the color. Maybe there's a strobe light, which gives the effect of a disco ball in a certain area, but there isn't a disco ball. whatever it is that you can think of, and let your lighting person run a little crazy because lighting doesn't cost you much additional. So if you can create the effect with lighting instead of actually physically buying and making it, you're saving time and money, but you're also creating something really cool where people are gonna think about it later. Like, wow, remember that event we went to? And they didn't have a disco ball, but they had like a ball and somehow created a disco effect. That's what we want. We want that feel, that awe moment, that wow, especially because it is probably for an event. If you're doing it at home just for fun, cool, video it and show the world. We wanna see. But if you're doing it for an event, those wow factors are how you get people to talk about your event and wanna come to your events in the future. When you start adding additional elements to your event, this is where lighting can really play a role. If you're adding fog, glitter, rhinestones, use lighting to create these cool effects. Again, if you want something dark and moody, maybe there is uplighting, or maybe there's lighting just on the floor, but it's aiming towards a fog machine that's coming at you. Maybe you want that disco ball effect and you're using rhinestones on a moving piece of fabric with lighting hitting it so it creates glitter on the wall. You could do this with a fan, fabric, and a light. It's pretty inexpensive and pretty easy, but when people realize how you've done it, they're going to be so excited and they're gonna tell people, oh yeah, I saw it at this show, which again is what you want. You wanna get people talking about it. So overall, when you are decorating for an event, remember you're going for feel. You're not necessarily gonna have people up close and personal with the things you're using to decorate. So think overall, how does it feel? How does it make you feel? If you're looking for more information on this, you can check out our website, Studio X Presents. We do have a lot of tips and tricks on there, and we also have a production course if you are interested in learning more about how we build things for our events. And as always, please stay safe out there.